At 30,000 feet, Rebecca thought she had escaped her nightmare. But when her abusive husband appeared on the same flight with his mistress, she realized it was all a trap. What happened next shocked 2 million live stream viewers and changed everything. This pregnant woman's desperate fight for survival became the most viral evidence of domestic abuse ever recorded. By the time this plane landed, a tech mogul's empire had crumbled, and the truth had set her free. If this story grips you, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Let's dive in. The boarding announcement for Flight 447 echoed through Denver International Airport as Rebecca Matthews clutched her carry-on bag with trembling hands. At 7 months pregnant, every step toward the gate felt like walking deeper into quicksand. The foundation she had carefully applied that morning barely concealed the purple bruise spreading across her left cheek, and the oversized sunglasses felt like a flimsy shield against the world's judgment. Rebecca had discovered the credit card charge 3 hours earlier. Tyler had paid for her ticket. Her escape had been funded by the very man she was fleeing from, and that realization made her blood turn to ice water. But by then, it was too late to turn back. The alternative was returning to their penthouse where Tyler's fists had spoken louder than words just 12 hours before. She settled into seat 14A, pressing her palm against her swollen belly as the baby shifted restlessly inside her. The little one seemed to sense her panic, responding to every spike in her heart rate with worried kicks against her ribs. Rebecca whispered softly under her breath, trying to calm both herself and her unborn child. "It's going to be okay, little one. Little. Mommy's getting us somewhere safe." But even as she spoke the words, doubt crept through her voice like poison. Tyler Matthews wasn't the kind of man who let his possessions simply walk away. As the founder and CEO of Technova Industries, he had built an empire on control and manipulation. What made her think she could outsmart him? The plane filled with the usual mix of business travelers and vacationers. Their cheerful chatter, a stark contrast to the storm raging in Rebecca's chest. She kept her head down, studying the safety card with unseeing eyes, when a familiar voice cut through her fog of terror. Rebecca Collins. Her maiden name. No one had called her that in 3 years. She looked up to see a face from her past. Older now, but unmistakably familiar. Michael Harrison stood in the aisle, his airline security uniform crisp and professional, but his eyes warm with recognition. Mick, the nickname slipped out before she could stop it. They had been close friends in college, study partners who had spent countless nights in the library working toward their degrees. He had wanted to be more than friends, but Rebecca had been focused on her career. Now, seeing his kind face felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "I can't believe it's you, dear," Mick said, glancing around before lowering his voice. "I'm the security chief for this flight. Rebecca, what happened to your face?" The question she had been dreading hung in the air between them. Rebecca's hand instinctively moved to her cheek, then dropped to her belly. She couldn't hide behind lies anymore, not when her baby's life might depend on telling the truth. "I married the wrong man," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. "Mick, I need help." His expression immediately shifted from friendly surprise to professional concern. "We'll talk more when we reach cruising altitude," he promised quietly. "You're safe now, Rebecca. I won't let anything happen to you." For the first time in months, Rebecca felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Mick had always been reliable, always been there when she needed him. Maybe, just maybe, she had found her guardian angel at 30,000 feet. The plane began to taxi toward the runway, and Rebecca closed her eyes, allowing herself to believe that her nightmare might finally be ending. She had no idea that her real terror was just beginning. As Flight 447 climbed toward cruising altitude, Rebecca finally allowed her shoulders to relax for the first time in hours. Mick had promised to help her, and she clung to that promise like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. The other passengers seemed absorbed in their own concerns, books, laptops, and conversations that had nothing to do with her private hell. She was just beginning to believe she might actually escape when she heard the laugh. That cold, calculating laugh that had haunted her dreams for months. The sound that usually preceded Tyler's worst rages, when his mask of civility would slip completely away. Rebecca's blood turned to ice as she slowly turned in her seat. Tyler Matthews walked down the aisle like he owned the aircraft, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his smile predatory and triumphant. Behind him followed Vanessa Sterling, her platinum blonde hair catching the cabin lights, her designer dress clinging to her model thin frame. Vanessa's 2 million social media followers knew her as a lifestyle influencer who promoted wellness and positivity. They had no idea she was sleeping with a married man whose pregnant wife lived in terror. "Hello, darling," Tyler said as he reached Rebecca's row, his voice carrying just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Did you really think I wouldn't track my own credit card?" Rebecca's mouth went dry. She tried to speak, but no words came. Tyler's smile widened as he watched her struggle, feeding off her fear like a vampire drawing blood. Surprised, Vanessa chimed in, her voice artificially sweet. She pulled out her phone and began recording. "Look who I found trying to run away from her loving husband. Isn't pregnancy just so hard on some women's mental health?" Several passengers looked up with interest, drawn by Vanessa's camera and Tyler's commanding presence. To them, this probably looked like a happy family reunion. They couldn't see the terror in Rebecca's eyes or the way her hands shook as she gripped the armrest. Tyler slid into the seat directly behind Rebecca, leaning forward so his breath tickled her ear. "You've been very naughty, Rebecca. Did you think I wouldn't find out about your little escape plan? I've been tracking your every move for weeks." The words hit her like physical blows. Weeks. He had known about her plan to leave, had been watching her prepare, letting her believe she had a chance at freedom before snatching it away. It was psychological torture of the cruelest kind. "Please," Rebecca whispered, her voice breaking. "The baby." "Oh, don't worry about our baby," Tyler interrupted, his tone shifting to false concern for the benefit of anyone listening. "I've already made arrangements. The best doctors, the finest facilities. You'll have everything you need." But Rebecca heard the threat beneath his words. Control. He would control where she went, who she saw, how she gave birth. The baby would become another chain binding her to him, another weapon he could use against her. Vanessa continued filming, angling the camera to capture Rebecca's distress while keeping Tyler out of frame. "Sometimes pregnant women get these wild ideas," she explained to her phone. "It's actually really common. The hormones can make them paranoid and irrational." Rebecca felt the walls of the cabin closing in around her. The other passengers were starting to whisper among themselves, and she could feel their eyes on her. Tyler had turned her escape attempt into a public spectacle. And worse, he was making her look like the unstable one. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, and Rebecca's stomach lurched. She pressed both hands against her belly, feeling the baby respond to her distress with agitated movements. 7 months along, and her child was already learning to live in a world of fear and chaos. Tyler's hand suddenly appeared on the back of her seat, his fingers drumming against the fabric in a rhythm she knew too well. It was the same pattern he would tap on their kitchen table right before he would explode into violence. A warning, a countdown to pain. "We're going to have such a nice vacation in Miami," he said pleasantly. "Just the three of us. Well, soon to be four." Rebecca closed her eyes and tried to disappear into the seat. Her moment of hope with Mick felt like a lifetime ago. She was trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet with the man who had spent 2 years systematically destroying her soul, and there was nowhere left to run. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and Rebecca felt a touch on her shoulder. She looked up to find Mick Harrison standing in the aisle, his security badge catching the overhead light. For a moment, her heart soared. He had come to help her, just as he'd promised. "Mrs. Matthews." Mick's voice was professional, calm. "I need to speak with you about your travel arrangements." Tyler immediately stood, extending his hand with the practiced charm that had fooled so many people over the years. "You must be airline security. I'm Tyler Matthews, Technova Industries. I believe you know my wife from college." Mick shook Tyler's hand, and Rebecca noticed something pass between the two men, a look of recognition that made her stomach drop toward her feet. "Actually, Mr. Matthews, we've met before," Mick said smoothly. "At the Technova security conference last year. You probably don't remember me, but your presentation on digital surveillance was fascinating." Rebecca's world tilted on its axis. The conference, Tyler had bragged about it for months, how he had impressed government officials and security experts with his company's tracking capabilities. He had been selling surveillance technology to law enforcement and private security firms. "Of course," Tyler said, his smile growing wider. "Michael Harrison, right? You were asking about our facial recognition software. Small world. Indeed it is, Mick replied. He looked down at Rebecca, and she saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Pity. Not the kind of pity that led to rescue, but the kind that came with resignation. Rebecca, your husband is very concerned about you. He's told me about your condition. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Condition. As if her desperation to escape abuse was a mental illness that needed treatment. Mick, please, Rebecca whispered, but he was already shaking his head. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I wish things were different, but I owe Matthews too much to interfere. His voice dropped so only she could hear. The loan for my mother's cancer treatment, the job recommendation that got me this position. I can't bite the hand that feeds me. Rebecca felt the last pillar of hope crumble beneath her. Tyler hadn't just found her by accident. He had orchestrated this entire situation, knowing that Mick would be on this flight, knowing that his financial leverage would ensure compliance. The man she had trusted as her salvation was just another piece on Tyler's chessboard. But don't worry, Mick continued, louder now for the benefit of nearby passengers. I'll make sure you're comfortable for the rest of the flight. Maybe you should try to get some rest. Pregnancy can be so exhausting. Well, Tyler's hand fell on Rebecca's shoulder, his grip tight enough to bruise. Thank you, Michael. I knew I could count on your professionalism. As Mick walked away, Rebecca felt tears burning behind her eyes. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical blow Tyler had ever landed. She had allowed herself to hope, and that hope had been weaponized against her. Vanessa leaned forward from the row behind, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. It's so nice when people look out for family. Don't you think everyone can see how much Tyler loves you? Several passengers nodded approvingly. An older woman across the aisle smiled warmly at Tyler, clearly impressed by his apparent devotion to his troubled wife. Rebecca wanted to scream, to tell them all the truth, but she knew how it would look. A hysterical pregnant woman making wild accusations against her caring husband and his helpful friend. Tyler squeezed her shoulder harder, his fingers finding the exact spot where he had grabbed her the night before. See, darling, everyone wants what's best for you. Why don't you close your eyes and rest? We have a long day ahead of us when we land. Rebecca stared out the small window at the clouds below, each one looking like a door that had been slammed shut, 30,000 feet above the earth. She had never felt more trapped. The plane that was supposed to carry her to freedom had become her prison, and the key was in the hands of the man who had spent 2 years teaching her that escape was impossible. Behind her, she could hear Vanessa's phone camera clicking as she documented their sweet family moment for her millions of followers. Evidence of Tyler's devotion, proof of Rebecca's instability. Another nail in the coffin of her credibility. The baby kicked against her ribs, as if trying to break free from the prison of her womb. Rebecca pressed her hand against the movement, whispering silently, I'm sorry, little one. Mommy tried. 30 minutes into the flight, Vanessa Sterling stood in the aisle and raised her phone, her influencer smile dazzling under the cabin lights. Her 2 million followers had made her rich selling the dream of perfect living, and now she was about to sell them the greatest performance of her career. Hey, beautiful souls, she chirped into her camera, her voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm that had made her famous. Vanessa here with a really important message about mental health awareness. Rebecca felt Tyler's hand tighten on her shoulder as passengers began to look up from their books and devices. This was planned. Every gesture, every word had been choreographed to destroy what remained of her credibility. So I'm on this flight, and I've encountered a really heartbreaking situation. Vanessa continued, slowly panning her camera to show Tyler's concerned face. This amazing man, Tyler Matthews, maybe you've heard of Technova Industries, is dealing with something so many families face. The camera moved to capture Rebecca from behind, careful not to show her face clearly, but displaying her obvious distress. Rebecca wanted to turn around to defend herself, but she knew it would only make things worse. His wife is 7 months pregnant, and she's been struggling with some really serious mental health issues, Vanessa explained, her voice dripping with fake compassion. She actually tried to run away from her loving husband today. Can you imagine how scared and confused she must be? Comments began flooding Vanessa's live stream. Rebecca couldn't see them, but she could imagine the responses. Sympathy for Tyler, concern for the unborn baby, judgment for the unstable pregnant woman. Tyler has been so patient, so understanding, Vanessa continued. He's gotten her the best doctors, the most supportive care team. But pregnancy hormones combined with underlying mental health conditions can create these really intense episodes. Tyler leaned forward, speaking directly to Vanessa's camera with the polished ease of a corporate executive who had charmed investors out of millions. It's been challenging, he admitted, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. Rebecca is the love of my life, and seeing her struggle like this breaks my heart. But we're going to get through this together. Rebecca's hands began to shake. She watched the reflection of Vanessa's live stream in the window, seeing her own terror broadcast to 2 million strangers who were already forming opinions about her mental state. The comments were scrolling too fast to read, but the heart emojis and crying faces told her everything she needed to know. What's so inspiring, Vanessa said, turning the camera back to herself, is how Tyler refuses to give up on his wife, even when she gets violent. She's never been violent, a voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a middle-aged woman in scrubs who had been quietly reading a medical journal. Rebecca felt a flicker of hope. Finally, someone who might see through Tyler's performance. I'm sorry, Tyler said smoothly, but you don't know my wife's condition. Dr. Walsh, isn't it? I recognize you from the medical conference last month. Dr. Walsh's expression changed subtly, and Rebecca's hope died as quickly as it had been born. Another connection. Another person in Tyler's web of influence. Of course, Dr. Walsh said carefully. Mr. Matthews, I apologize for interrupting. I was just concerned about the stress levels. That's very professional of you, Tyler replied. Perhaps you could examine Rebecca when we land. I'm worried this episode might affect the baby. Rebecca's breathing became shallow and rapid. An episode. He was making her panic response look like proof of mental illness, and a doctor he obviously knew was playing along. The walls of the cabin seemed to be closing in as more passengers turned to stare at the unfolding drama. Vanessa resumed her live stream, now with medical backing for Tyler's narrative. See, this is what I mean about community support. Even strangers are looking out for this family. An elderly man across the aisle nodded approvingly. That young man is a saint. Putting it up with that behavior while she's carrying his child. Rebecca wanted to scream that she wasn't the one with the problem, that Tyler was the monster hiding behind a perfect facade, but she knew how it would look, a hysterical pregnant woman attacking her devoted husband and his concerned friend. Every word she spoke would only confirm their story. The baby kicked frantically against her ribs, responding to her elevated heart rate and stress hormones. Rebecca pressed both hands against her belly, trying to calm herself for her child's sake, but the movement only made her look more unstable to the watching passengers. Mental health is so important, Vanessa concluded, ending her live stream. Remember to check on your loved ones, and never judge someone who's struggling. Tyler, you're an inspiration. As Vanessa sat down, Rebecca caught her reflection in the dark window again. She looked exactly like what they claimed. She was a desperate, frightened woman on the edge of a breakdown. The truth was that she was desperate and frightened, but not for the reasons they were telling the world. Tyler's voice whispered in her ear, quiet enough that only she could hear. 2 million people just watched you prove my point, darling. Who's going to believe you now? Rebecca's breathing became more labored as the plane leveled off at cruising altitude. The stress of Tyler's psychological torture combined with her pregnancy was taking a physical toll that she could no longer hide. Her hands gripped the armrests as a wave of cramping pain shot through her abdomen. Oh no, she gasped, doubling over as much as her seatbelt would allow. Dr. Walsh immediately stood up, her medical training overriding whatever relationship she had with Tyler. What's happening? Describe the pain. Cramping, Rebecca panted, sweat beading on her forehead. Sharp pains. Something's wrong. The entire cabin seemed to freeze. Even Vanessa lowered her phone, her influencer mask slipping to reveal genuine concern. Pregnant women in distress had a way of cutting through all social pretenses and reaching something primal in human nature. Dr. Walsh knelt beside Rebecca's seat, her hands professional and gentle as she checked her pulse. How far along are you? 7 months, Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face. Please don't let me lose my baby. It's all I have left. The raw desperation in her voice seemed to wake something in the watching passengers. This wasn't performance or mental illness. This was a mother terrified for her child's life. Tyler immediately shifted into concerned husband mode. But there was something different about this performance. A edge of genuine panic that Rebecca had never seen before. If she lost the baby, he lost his most powerful weapon against her. Is there anything we can do? Tyler asked Dr. Walsh, his voice tight with what almost sounded like real emotion. Should we turn the plane around? Daughter. Walsh was taking Rebecca's blood pressure with a small device from her medical bag. Her pressure is elevated, and she's showing signs of severe stress response. We need to keep her calm and monitor her closely. A flight attendant hurried over with an oxygen mask, and Rebecca felt the cool air fill her lungs. Slowly, the cramping began to ease, but the fear remained. She had been so focused on escaping Tyler that she hadn't considered what the stress might do to her pregnancy. The baby's moving, Rebecca said with relief, feeling familiar kicks against her ribs. I think we're okay. De Walsh nodded, but her expression remained serious. This level of stress isn't good for either of you. You need rest, hydration, and most importantly, a calm environment. Her eyes flickered meaningfully toward Tyler as she said the last part, and Rebecca felt a spark of hope. Maybe Dr. Walsh was starting to see through Tyler's act. Maybe the medical crisis had shifted something in the cabin's dynamics. But Tyler was already adapting, morphing his narrative to fit the new circumstances. Doctor, could this episode be related to her mental health condition? I've been so worried about the effects of her anxiety on the pregnancy. The question was expertly crafted to plant doubt while seeming genuinely concerned. Dr. Walsh hesitated, clearly torn between her medical observations and whatever obligation she felt toward Tyler. Stress can certainly trigger physical symptoms, she said carefully. But the important thing now is stabilizing both mother and baby. Kevin Mitchell, a passenger who had been quietly observing from a few rows back, suddenly stood up. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of earnest face that belonged to someone who still believed in justice. Excuse me, Kevin said, addressing Dr. Walsh but speaking loud enough for the cabin to hear. I've been recording this whole situation on my phone. For safety reasons, he added quickly when Tyler's eyes snapped to him. And I'm wondering if someone should review the footage to understand what might have caused this medical emergency. Rebecca's heart leaped. Someone had been documenting Tyler's psychological abuse. Finally, there might be evidence of what was really happening. Tyler's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold fury beneath. But he recovered quickly, standing to his full height and using his corporate executive presence to intimidate the younger man. I appreciate your concern, Tyler said smoothly, but I think my wife's privacy should be respected during this medical situation. Perhaps you could delete any recordings you've made out of compassion for what we're going through. It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with the kind of quiet authority that had built Tyler's business empire. Kevin's resolve wavered as he felt the weight of Tyler's attention. I suppose that would be the right thing to do, Kevin said hesitantly, looking around for support that didn't come. Rebecca watched in despair as Kevin pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his videos. Her evidence was about to disappear, deleted by a well-meaning stranger who had no idea he was destroying her only chance at justice. Dr. Walsh finished checking Rebecca's vital signs and straightened up. She needs rest and monitoring, but I think the immediate crisis has passed. As the tension in the cabin began to ease, Rebecca felt something inside her break. Not physically, but emotionally. The medical emergency had given her a brief moment where people saw her as a human being in need of help. But Tyler had already begun weaving it into his narrative of her instability, and her potential witness was deleting the evidence of abuse. She closed her eyes and placed both hands on her belly, feeling her baby's reassuring movements. Whatever happened to her, she had to protect this innocent life. Even if it meant enduring Tyler's control for the rest of her pregnancy, even if it meant sacrificing her own freedom. She couldn't let her emotional state harm her child. But as she made that silent surrender, Rebecca had no idea that her story was about to take another devastating turn. As Flight 447 continued its journey toward Miami, Rebecca had resigned herself to defeat. The medical emergency had passed, Kevin had deleted his recordings under Tyler's pressure, and Dr. Walsh was maintaining professional distance despite her earlier moment of concern. Rebecca felt like a chess piece that had been moved into checkmate, with no moves left to make. That's when her phone buzzed with a text message. Rebecca glanced at Tyler, who was absorbed in conversation with Vanessa about damage control for her live stream. Carefully, she checked her phone under the airplane blanket the flight attendant had provided. The message was from her sister Amanda. Package delivered as requested. Hope it helps. Love you? Rebecca's heart began to race, but this time with hope instead of fear. 3 weeks ago, when she had first started planning her escape, Amanda had helped her install a hidden camera app on her phone. It was designed to look like a weather app, but it had been recording audio and video whenever Rebecca activated it with a specific gesture. She had activated it this morning during Tyler's final attack, when he had beaten her for discovering his affair with Vanessa. She had activated it again when he appeared on the plane, and it had been running during Vanessa's live stream and his performance for the other passengers. Everything was recorded. Every threat, every manipulation, every moment where Tyler's mask had slipped to reveal the monster beneath. And according to Amanda's message, the footage was already being uploaded to a secure cloud server. Rebecca's hands trembled as she realized what this meant. She had evidence, real, undeniable evidence of Tyler's abuse and manipulation. But she also knew that Tyler would never let her reach Miami alive if he discovered what she had done. She was so focused on her phone that she almost missed the conversation happening in the row behind her. Tyler was speaking quietly to someone, and his tone made her blood run cold. I don't care what it costs, Tyler was saying into his phone. I want it handled before we land. Rebecca strained to hear more, pretending to sleep while keeping her ears focused on Tyler's voice. Yes, she's becoming a problem, Tyler continued. The medical episode was bad enough, but if she starts talking to authorities in Miami, handle it, make it look like pregnancy complications. Tragic, but natural. Rebecca's entire body went numb. Tyler wasn't just planning to control her when they landed. He was planning to eliminate her entirely. The baby would survive. Modern medicine could keep a 7-month fetus alive, and Tyler would be the grieving widower, raising his child alone while inheriting Rebecca's trust fund. She forced herself to remain perfectly still, even as every instinct screamed at her to run. But there was nowhere to go on an airplane. She was trapped in a metal tube with a man who was actively planning her murder. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Amanda, stream going live in 10 minutes. You'll have backup soon. Rebecca's mind raced. Amanda had done more than just save the recordings. She was broadcasting them live, probably on social media platforms where Tyler couldn't control the narrative. In 10 minutes, the world would see the real Tyler Matthews. But would 10 minutes be enough? Tyler's voice continued behind her, making arrangements with someone on the ground in Miami. Rebecca caught fragments. Ambulance waiting. Natural complications, though. No autopsy needed with my connections. Every word confirmed her worst fears. Tyler had planned this entire scenario, probably from the moment he discovered her escape attempt. The credit card trace, the airplane confrontation, even her medical emergency, it was all building toward her elimination. Rebecca's baby kicked against her ribs, and she pressed her hand against the movement. Her child was the only reason Tyler was keeping her alive for now. But once they were on the ground, once he could control the medical response, both she and her baby would be at his mercy. She glanced around the cabin desperately. Dr. Walsh was reading her medical journal again. Kevin was staring out his window, probably regretting his decision to delete the recordings. The other passengers were absorbed in their own activities, completely unaware that they were witnesses to the planning of a murder. Mick walked past her row, checking on passengers, and Rebecca felt a stab of betrayal so sharp it took her breath away. He had been her friend once, had cared about her, but Tyler's money had bought his silence. He wouldn't help her even if she told him about Tyler's plan. Her phone showed 8 minutes until Amanda's live stream went active. 8 minutes until the world would see Tyler for what he really was. But Rebecca was beginning to understand that 8 minutes might be 7 minutes too long. Tyler leaned forward and placed his hand on her shoulder, his grip gentle but possessive. How are you feeling, darling? Better. Much better. Rebecca lied, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. Thank you for being so patient with me. Tyler's smile was warm and loving, the perfect expression of a devoted husband. But Rebecca could see the calculation behind his eyes. The satisfaction of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. "Rest now," Tyler whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Everything will be over soon." Rebecca closed her eyes and pretended to sleep, while silently counting down the minutes until her sister's evidence would expose the truth. She just had to survive until then. 7 minutes and counting, 6 minutes until Amanda's live stream, and Rebecca could feel Tyler's eyes boring into the back of her head. She forced her breathing to remain steady and deep, maintaining the pretense of sleep while her mind raced through possible scenarios. Tyler was smart enough to check her phone if he suspected anything, and if he discovered the hidden recordings, she and her baby would be dead before they reached Miami. 5 minutes. Tyler's phone buzzed, and she heard him answer quietly. "Everything in place," Tyler murmured. "Good. Make sure the medical examiner understands the situation. Pregnancy complications can be very unpredictable at 7 months." Rebecca's stomach lurched, but she forced herself to remain motionless. Tyler was confirming the details of her murder, and there was nothing she could do but wait and hope that Amanda's evidence would reach the right people in time. 4 minutes. Vanessa's voice cut through Rebecca's thoughts as she started another live stream. "Hey, beautiful souls, quick update on our situation." Vanessa chirped into her phone. "The poor woman seems to be resting now, which is so important for maternal health. Tyler has been such an amazing support system through this difficult pregnancy journey." The comments on Vanessa's stream were flowing with heart emojis and supportive messages for Tyler. Rebecca could see the reflection of the phone screen in the window, watching strangers praise the man who was planning her death. 3 minutes. Rebecca's phone was hidden under her blanket, but she could feel it vibrating with incoming notifications. Amanda's preparation was generating attention somewhere in the digital world, building momentum like a gathering storm. 2 minutes. Dr. Walsh stood up and approached Tyler, speaking in low tones that carried the weight of medical authority. "Mr. Matthews, I wanted to discuss your wife's condition when we land. Given the stress episode and her elevated blood pressure, I think she should be evaluated at a hospital immediately." "Already arranged," Tyler replied smoothly, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who controlled every variable. "I have an ambulance meeting us at the gate. Rebecca's personal physician will be waiting to ensure both mother and baby receive the best possible care." Rebecca's blood turned to ice. Tyler's personal physician would be the one to ensure she never left the hospital alive. Every detail had been orchestrated, every contingency planned. 1 minute. Kevin Mitchell suddenly straightened in his seat, staring at his phone with wide eyes. He had been scrolling through social media during the flight, and Rebecca prayed he was seeing Amanda's broadcast beginning to surface on his timeline. "Oh my God," Kevin whispered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This is absolutely insane. This can't be real." His shock was genuine, the kind of horrified disbelief that comes from witnessing something that shouldn't exist in a civilized world. 0. Amanda's live stream went live. Rebecca knew the moment it happened because Kevin's phone screen lit up with a video she recognized herself. This morning, cowering on her kitchen floor while Tyler's voice raged above her like thunder. "You stupid bitch. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you could leave me?" The audio was crystal clear, Tyler's voice unmistakable as he berated his pregnant wife. The sound quality was perfect, capturing every nuance of his cruelty, every calculated word designed to destroy her spirit. Other passengers began pulling out their phones, drawn by Kevin's shocked expression and the disturbing audio emanating from his device. A middle-aged businessman in the row ahead turned around, his face pale with recognition. That's the man sitting right behind us," he said in disbelief. Tyler heard his own voice and spun around, his face draining of color as he saw Kevin's phone screen displaying his private brutality for the world to see. But it was too late. The live stream was spreading across social media platforms faster than he could possibly contain it, shared and reshared by thousands of viewers every second. "Turn that off," Tyler demanded, lunging toward Kevin's phone with the desperate aggression of a cornered animal. But Kevin pulled it away, his earlier intimidation replaced by righteous anger. "This is you," Kevin said, standing up despite Tyler's threatening presence. "This is you beating your pregnant wife. This is you planning to kill her." More phones came out as passengers searched for the viral video that was already trending on multiple platforms. Within seconds, the cabin was filled with the sounds of Tyler's abuse, his threats, his calculated cruelty toward Rebecca. The contrast between his current persona and the monster on the video was so stark that several passengers gasped audibly. An elderly woman across the aisle covered her mouth in horror. "That poor girl," she whispered. "How could anyone do that to someone carrying their child? That's, that's not what it looks like." Tyler stammered, but his usual smooth confidence had evaporated like morning mist. "The recording is out of context. Rebecca has episodes where she becomes violent, and I was defending myself. The audio doesn't show the full picture." "Shut up," Dr. Walsh interrupted, her professional composure cracking as she watched Tyler's true nature unfold on multiple screens throughout the cabin. "Just shut up. I've been a physician for 20 years. I know what domestic abuse looks like, and this is textbook, systematic, psychological, and physical torture." Her medical authority carried weight with the passengers, and Tyler's desperate explanations fell on increasingly hostile ears. Vanessa tried to maintain her live stream, but comments were flooding in from viewers who had seen Amanda's evidence. Her follower count was dropping in real time as people realized she was complicit in covering up domestic violence. "This has to be fake," Vanessa protested to her camera, but her voice lacked conviction. "Tyler would never hurt anyone. He's the most gentle, caring man I know." "There's more," Kevin announced, scrolling through the viral content with increasing horror. "Hours of recordings, audio from this plane, video of him planning." His voice trailed off as he reached the most damning evidence of Tyler's phone conversation about arranging Rebecca's death. Rebecca sat up slowly, no longer pretending to sleep. Around her, the cabin had transformed from a space where she was seen as mentally ill to one where Tyler was revealed as a predator plotting murder. Passengers were staring at him with undisguised disgust and horror, their earlier sympathy for him replaced by protective anger toward Rebecca. The transformation was complete. Tyler's careful facade was crumbling in real time, broadcast live to millions of viewers worldwide. His business reputation, his social standing, his control over Rebecca, all of it was dissolving as the truth spread across the internet like wildfire. "Rebecca," Dr. Walsh said gently, kneeling beside her seat with tears in her eyes. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been living in this nightmare?" "2 years," Rebecca whispered, her voice gaining strength as she spoke the truth aloud. "Ever since we got married, he's been planning to kill me when we land. Make it look like pregnancy complications so he can raise the baby alone and inherit my trust fund." The words hung in the air like an accusation that could no longer be denied or explained away. Tyler's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But no words came. His empire of lies had been destroyed by the truth, and there was nothing left for him to say. For the first time in 2 years, Rebecca Matthews felt truly safe. The cabin erupted into chaos as Tyler's world collapsed around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. Passengers were openly staring, some recording with their phones, others calling authorities on the ground. The viral live stream had reached law enforcement agencies across the country, and Rebecca could hear the flight attendants speaking urgently into their communication devices. "Miami Tower, this is Flight 447. The captain's voice came over the intercom with military precision. "We have a federal crime in progress aboard this aircraft. Request immediate law enforcement response upon landing. Repeat, we need federal agents standing by." The announcement sent a ripple of tension through the cabin. This wasn't just a domestic dispute anymore. It was a federal case involving conspiracy to commit murder, and everyone aboard had become witnesses to a crime. Tyler stood in the aisle, his face cycling through emotions as he realized the full scope of his exposure. Rage, desperation, calculation. Rebecca had seen this progression before, usually right before his most violent outbursts. But here, surrounded by dozens of witnesses and 30,000 feet above the ground, his options were limited. "This is all fabricated," Tyler announced to the cabin, his voice rising with each word. "My wife is mentally ill. She's been planning this elaborate deception for months, working with her sister to create fake evidence designed to destroy my reputation and steal my fortune." But his words fell on deaf ears. Too many people had seen the raw footage, heard the genuine terror in Rebecca's voice, witnessed the stark contrast between Tyler's public persona and private cruelty. The evidence was too overwhelming, too visceral to dismiss. A businessman in first class stood up, his expensive suit and authoritative bearing commanding attention. "I'm a federal prosecutor," he announced. "What we've all witnessed here constitutes multiple felonies. Mr. Matthews, I strongly advise you to stop talking immediately." Tyler's face went white. Even his legal troubles were multiplying in real time, witnessed by someone who understood exactly how much prison time he was facing. Dr. Walsh had moved to sit beside Rebecca, creating a physical barrier between her and Tyler while monitoring her vital signs. "The medical episode makes perfect sense now," she said quietly, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Chronic stress from long-term abuse can trigger exactly the symptoms you experienced. Your body was trying to protect both you and your baby from a perceived threat." Her professional opinion carried weight with the cabin, adding medical credibility to Rebecca's story and further undermining Tyler's claims of mental illness. Mick Harrison appeared in the aisle, his security uniform a reminder of his authority on the aircraft. But instead of supporting Tyler as he had before, his expression was grim and professional. The dynamic between them had shifted completely. "Mr. Matthews, I need you to return to your seat immediately and remain there for the duration of this flight," Mick ordered with the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Michael, you know me," Tyler pleaded, dropping his corporate demeanor for desperate familiarity. "You know what I've done for you, for your family, your mother's medical bills, your career advancement. This woman is destroying both our lives with her elaborate lies and manipulations." Mick's jaw tightened, and Rebecca could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. But the evidence was too clear, the crime too serious to ignore. "Sir, federal agents will be boarding this aircraft the moment we land," Mick replied formally. "I strongly advise you to remain calm and comply with all instructions. Anything you say or do from this point forward will be used against you in court." Rebecca watched Tyler's face transform as he realized that even his financial leverage over Mick couldn't overcome the evidence against him. His carefully constructed network of obligation and intimidation was powerless against viral video footage viewed by millions. Vanessa had ended her live stream and was frantically making phone calls, probably to lawyers and publicists. Her perfect facade was cracking as brands began terminating sponsorship deals in real time. Her influencer career was over. No company would ever associate with someone who had helped cover up domestic abuse and attempted murder. "This isn't over," Tyler hissed, making one last attempt to intimidate Rebecca with the voice that had controlled her for 2 years. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. The resources I have, the people who owe me favors." "Actually," Kevin Mitchell interrupted from his seat, holding up his phone with a satisfied expression, "I think we all know exactly what you're capable of. It's been broadcast to about 15 million people in the last 20 minutes. The number hit Tyler like a physical blow. 15 million people had seen his true face in the span of a single flight. His business partners, his investors, his competitors, his family, everyone who mattered in his professional and personal world now knew he was a domestic abuser who had planned to murder his pregnant wife. Rebecca felt her baby kick. But this time the movement felt different, celebratory almost, as if her child could sense that the environment of fear and violence that had surrounded them both was finally ending. "Ma'am," a senior flight attendant approached Rebecca with genuine concern in her eyes. "The captain has been in contact with authorities on the ground. EMTs will be standing by when we land, but they'll be there for your safety and health, not for whatever Mr. Matthews had planned with his associates." Rebecca nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you, all of you. I never believed anyone would listen." She looked around the cabin at the passengers who had witnessed her ordeal. Just hours earlier, many of them had viewed her as unstable, potentially dangerous to herself and her unborn child. Now they saw her as a survivor, a woman who had been strong enough to gather evidence against her abuser, even while living in constant terror. "The baby," Dr. Walsh said, placing a gentle hand on Rebecca's belly and checking her pulse. "How is the little one doing now that the immediate stress is past?" "Active," Rebecca replied with the first genuine smile she had felt in months. "Very active, I think. I think we're both going to be okay for the first time in a very long time." Tyler slumped in his seat behind them, the fight gone out of him as the reality of his situation sank in completely. His phone was buzzing constantly with calls from lawyers, business partners, media outlets, and board members. His empire was crumbling in real time, live tweeted and live streamed for the entire world to see. The plane began its descent toward Miami, and Rebecca felt each foot of lost altitude as a step toward freedom. Not just physical freedom from Tyler's presence, but psychological freedom from the fear that had controlled every aspect of her life for 2 years. As the city lights of Miami appeared below them like earthbound stars, Rebecca placed both hands on her belly and whispered to her unborn child, "We made it, little one. We're finally free." But even as she spoke the words, Rebecca knew that true freedom would require more than just surviving this flight. It would require rebuilding her life from scratch, healing from years of trauma, and learning to trust herself and others again. The hardest part of her journey was just beginning, but for the first time, she was facing it with hope instead of fear. Flight 447 touched down at Miami International Airport with a gentleness that belied the storm that had raged within its cabin. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Rebecca could see flashing lights through the small window police cars, ambulances, and what looked like federal vehicles surrounding their arrival area. The captain's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, federal agents will be boarding this aircraft. Please remain seated until instructed in otherwise. Thank you for your cooperation during this difficult flight." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Watching the news coverage. FBI confirms arrest warrants issued. You did it, sis. You're free. Free." The word felt foreign after 2 years of captivity disguised as marriage. Rebecca touched her belly, feeling her baby's reassuring movements. They had both survived Tyler's final trap. Tyler sat motionless in his seat, staring straight ahead as his phone continued to buzz with ignored calls. Vanessa had gone silent, probably on the advice of whatever crisis management team she had hastily assembled. Walsh remained beside Rebecca, a protective presence that she would never forget. The cabin door opened with a hiss, and federal agents filed aboard with the efficient precision of people who dealt with dangerous criminals every day. Leading them was Detective Amanda Brooks, no relation to Rebecca's sister, despite the shared first name, whose reputation for handling domestic violence cases was legendary in law enforcement circles. "Tyler Matthews," Detective Brooks announced, approaching his row with handcuffs ready. "You're under arrest for domestic abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, and federal charges related to the threats made on this aircraft." Tyler finally looked up, his corporate mask completely shattered. "I want my lawyer." "You'll have that opportunity," Detective Brooks replied as she secured the handcuffs. "But first, you're going to answer some questions about the recordings that have been viewed by half the internet." As Tyler was led away, he made one final attempt to intimidate Rebecca. "This isn't over," he called out as agents escorted him down the aisle. "You'll never be safe from me." Detective Brooks stopped and turned back to Tyler with a cold smile. "Actually, Miss Matthews, given the federal charges and the attempted murder conspiracy, you're looking at 25 to life. She'll be very safe from you." Rebecca watched Tyler disappear through the cabin door, led away in handcuffs like the criminal he had always been. 2 years of fear and abuse were walking away with him, and she could finally breathe freely. Vanessa Sterling was arrested moments later, charged as an accessory for her role in covering up Tyler's abuse and helping to plan Rebecca's elimination. Her social media empire crumbled as sponsors terminated contracts and followers abandoned her in droves. Mrs. Matthews, Detective Brooks approached Rebecca with a gentle expression. "I'm going to need a full statement when you're ready, but first, let's get you to a hospital. We want to make sure both you and your baby are healthy." "Real doctors this time," Rebecca asked, remembering Tyler's planned medical complications. "The best obstetric team in Miami," Detective Brooks confirmed. "Tyler Matthews will never be able to hurt you again." As Rebecca was helped off the plane, she was surprised to see Mick Harrison waiting by the gate. His security badge had been replaced by a badge from the FBI, and his expression was apologetic but determined. "Rebecca, I'm sorry," Mick said as she passed. "I was undercover, working on a federal investigation into Tyler's business practices. I couldn't break cover, even for you. But your courage in gathering that evidence made our case airtight." Rebecca stared at him in shock. "You're FBI, Financial Crimes Unit," Mick confirmed. "Tyler's been under investigation for money laundering and securities fraud for months. Your domestic abuse evidence will put him away for life, but our financial crimes case will make sure he never has resources to threaten anyone again. Another revelation, another layer of Tyler's criminal empire exposed. Rebecca realized she had been married to a man who was even more dangerous than she had known. As the ambulance carried her toward the hospital, Rebecca watched Miami's skyline grow larger through the rear windows. For the first time in 2 years, she was seeing a city as a place of opportunity rather than a destination of fear. Her phone buzzed with messages from Amanda, from friends who had seen the news coverage, from domestic violence organizations offering support. The viral evidence had done more than just free her from Tyler. It had created a network of support she never knew existed. At the hospital, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Miami's leading maternal fetal specialist, performed a thorough examination. "Your baby is perfectly healthy," she announced with a warm smile. "Strong heartbeat, good movement, excellent position. Whatever stress you've been under, this little one is a fighter." Rebecca burst into tears of relief. Their baby had survived not just Tyler's physical abuse, but also the psychological trauma of living in constant fear. They were both going to be okay. As evening fell over Miami, Rebecca sat in her hospital bed watching news coverage of Tyler's arrest. The story had become international news, sparking conversations about domestic violence, the power of social media to expose abuse, and the courage of survivors who refused to stay silent. She placed her hands on her belly and whispered to her unborn child, "Your mommy is going to make sure you grow up in a world where you never have to be afraid." For the first time in 2 years, that felt like a promise she could keep. 6 months later, Rebecca Matthews now. Rebecca Collins again, having reclaimed her maiden name, sat in a rocking chair by the window of her new apartment, watching the sunrise paint the Denver skyline in shades of gold and pink. In her arms, baby Emma Collins slept peacefully, her tiny fingers wrapped around Rebecca's thumb. Emma had been born healthy and strong. 2 weeks after Tyler's trial had ended, with his conviction on all charges, 28 years to life, with no possibility of parole before 25 years. Rebecca would be 54 years old before Tyler could even apply for release, and Emma would be a grown woman who had never known the fear that once defined her mother's life. The apartment was small but filled with light, a stark contrast to the marble prison of Tyler's penthouse. Rebecca had furnished it simply, choosing comfort over luxury, safety over status. Every morning, she woke up grateful for the ordinary miracle of freedom. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Amanda. "Saw the interview on Good Morning America. You were amazing. So proud of you." Rebecca smiled, remembering the interview she had given the previous week. It had been part of her work with the Rebecca Collins Foundation, an organization she had established to help domestic violence survivors document abuse and escape safely. The foundation provided hidden camera technology, legal support, and safe housing, all the resources Rebecca wished she had known about during her darkest days. The viral video that had saved her life had become the foundation's most powerful tool for education and awareness. Rebecca had chosen to keep the footage public despite its personal cost, knowing that other women needed to see that escape was possible, that abusers could be defeated, and that the truth had power even against the most sophisticated lies. Emma stirred in her arms, making the soft sounds that meant feeding time was approaching. Rebecca adjusted her position in the rocking chair, marveling at how natural motherhood felt when it wasn't overshadowed by fear and violence. Her doorbell rang, and Rebecca carefully placed Emma in her crib before checking the security monitor. Tyler's abuse had made her careful about unexpected visitors, but this face made her smile. Detective Amanda Brooks stood on her doorstep, holding a small gift bag and wearing civilian clothes. "I hope you don't mind this surprise visit," Detective Brooks said when Rebecca opened the door. "I was in the neighborhood and wanted to see how you and Emma were doing." "We're doing wonderfully," Rebecca replied, leading her into the living room where Emma was beginning to fuss for her breakfast. "She's healthy, happy, and completely unaware that she's already famous." Detective Brooks laughed, watching Rebecca efficiently prepare a bottle. "The Foundation's latest video has been viewed 40 million times. You're changing lives, Rebecca." It was true. The Foundation had already helped hundreds of women escape abusive situations, providing them with the technology and legal support they needed to build cases against their abusers. Rebecca's story had proven that even the most powerful and manipulative men could be brought to justice when the truth was properly documented and courageously shared. Any word on Vanessa? Rebecca asked as she settled back into the rocking chair with Emma. Sentenced yesterday, Detective Brooks reported, 5 years for conspiracy and accessory charges. Her social media accounts have been permanently banned, and she's facing multiple civil lawsuits from the brands she defrauded. Rebecca felt a sense of closure at the news. Vanessa Sterling had been Tyler's willing accomplice in psychological abuse, and seeing her face consequences felt like another piece of justice falling into place. As Emma nursed contentedly, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them to this peaceful morning. The flight that had seemed like her final trap had actually been her liberation. The evidence she had gathered in terror had become a beacon of hope for other women. The viral exposure that had felt like public humiliation had transformed into a platform for change. I have something for Emma, Detective Brooks said, pulling a small teddy bear from her gift bag. It's from the Miami PD officers who worked the case. They wanted her to know that there are good guys in the world too. Rebecca accepted the bear with tears in her eyes. Emma immediately reached for it with curious fingers, her face lighting up with a baby's uncomplicated joy. This was the world Rebecca wanted for her daughter, where kindness existed alongside strength, where protection was freely given, and where women could speak their truth without fear. Her phone rang, and Rebecca saw a familiar name on the screen, Mick Harrison. She had kept in touch with the FBI agent who had been forced to maintain his cover during her darkest hour, understanding now that his apparent betrayal had been part of a larger operation to bring down Tyler's criminal empire. "Hello, Mick," Rebecca answered, putting the call on speaker so Detective Brooks could hear. "Hey, Rebecca, I have some news about Tyler's business assets." Mick's voice carried a satisfaction that Rebecca had learned to recognize. "The federal seizure is complete. Every penny of his fortune is being distributed to his victims, including a substantial sum for the foundation." Rebecca's breath caught. Tyler's money, earned through fraud and violence, would now fund the escape routes for his future victims. The resources he had used to control and intimidate would become tools of liberation and justice. "There's something else," Mick continued. "Tyler's been placed in federal protective custody. Apparently, some of his former business associates aren't happy about the money laundering investigation. He's going to spend the rest of his sentence looking over his shoulder." The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. Tyler, who had terrorized her with threats and intimidation, was now living in fear himself. Justice had a sense of poetry that felt almost too perfect to be real. After the call ended, Rebecca sat quietly with Emma, processing the magnitude of how completely her life had changed. A year ago, she had been a prisoner in a marble cage, counting bruises and planning impossible escapes. Today, she was a free woman, a loving mother, and an advocate whose voice carried across the world. Emma finished eating and looked up at her mother with bright, curious eyes that held no shadow of fear or trauma. This little girl would grow up knowing her own strength, surrounded by love and protection, free to become whoever she chose to be. Rebecca stood and carried Emma to the window, showing her the city spread out below them. "Look, baby girl," she whispered. "Look at all the possibilities. The world is wide open for you." As the sun climbed higher over Denver, Rebecca Collins held her daughter close and smiled at their reflection in the glass. Two survivors, two fighters, two women who had chosen freedom over fear and truth over silence. Behind them, Tyler Matthews was just a memory, a cautionary tale about the consequences of choosing violence over love. Ahead of them stretched an infinite horizon of possibilities, painted in the golden light of a new day. For Rebecca and Emma Collins, the nightmare was over, and their real lives were just beginning.